When it comes to film photography, learning how to meter properly can mean the difference between getting final results like this and getting final results like this. Quite the difference. Now, if you have shot film before, you'll know that feeling when you're out trying to take some photos and you just feel like you have no idea what you're doing. And if you haven't shot film yet and you're maybe watching this video to learn some stuff, just be prepared, because you're also going to feel like you have no idea what you're doing the first time you go out to shoot film. It's just part of the process and there's no avoiding it. But in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I meter the scenes before I take my shots, and hopefully that will help decrease that not having a clue what you're doing feeling just a little bit next time you go out to shoot. Now, if you've watched many of our videos here on the channel, you'll know that I try to avoid creating boring videos, boring sit-down videos about boring topics, because they're boring for you and they're also boring for me, believe it or not. And I feel like there's a risk that this one could fall into that category, so I'm going to try and run through it as quick as possible, get out what I want to say, and hopefully you can learn something from it and not be bored. Okay, so let's not mess around. Obviously, when it comes to metering a scene with film photography, it varies depending on the type of film camera that you're using. I have two film cameras, as you can see behind me here, and they are at opposite ends of the table when it comes to ease of use and speed, particularly when it comes to metering. I have the 35mm Nikon FE right here, which is pretty much fully automatic, or at least it can be. So the light meter in the Nikon will read the light that's hitting it and then choose a shutter speed depending on what it thinks the exposure needs to be. And that means that all I need to do is pick an aperture, and then the camera will automatically adjust the shutter speed, which I can see through the viewfinder, to get the exposure right. I can also adjust the exposure compensation on the top of the camera if I want it to overexpose or underexpose the scene a little bit. It's just a really quick process, and to be honest, so far it's worked pretty well for me for the majority of the shots, and if I really need to, I can also change into manual mode. So the 35mm Nikon is quick because of the automatic mode, and the Yashica is the complete opposite. The Yashica is a 60-year-old film camera, it's completely mechanical, and it doesn't have a light meter at all. And that means that I have to do everything myself, which means that I need a light meter, and I have looked around at getting some light meters, but they can be quite expensive, so I just use an app on my phone which is free. The app that I use is this one right here, and it's just simply called Light Meter, and it's worked, I would say, 98 or 99% of the time for me. It might not be as accurate as a proper light meter, but it does the trick for now. So the way I do it in the app is I choose camera meter, and then I simply just set the aperture for the scene or subject that I'm shooting. I then would choose the ISO of the film I'm using, which let's say is normally Portra 400. Now what I used to do is just tap on the area where the shadows were, and whatever exposure it told me, I would just go with that, shoot away, and hope that the brighter parts of the image weren't too overexposed. So essentially I was just exposing for the shadows, which a lot of the time will work, but the more you overexpose your skies, the more you will wash out the colours, and potentially you might lose some detail. But what I do now most of the time is I use the Ansel Adams zone system, which I actually learned from Cody Mitchell over on his YouTube channel, and he definitely explained it a lot better than I'm going to in this video, so I'll link that video below if you want to head over and check it out after this one. But I will try and quickly explain the zone system to you. Just bear with me. It's a little complicated. Well, the first time you hear it, it probably will be. So with this zone system method, there is 11 sections or 11 areas. You can see them on screen now. And just imagine that each of these segments is a shutter speed, and the shutter speed doubles with each one from 0 to 10. This might not be the correct way to explain this, but I think it'll make sense. So when I'm using the light meter app on the phone and I tap somewhere on the scene, it'll give me a shutter speed that it thinks I should use. Let's say that's 1/125th of a second. And on this zone system scale, whatever value I choose to shoot at will be placed right in the center, right here at number 5. So the shutter speed that you decide to shoot the scene at will always be at number 5 on this scale. So that means that anywhere darker than where you've tapped to get your exposure in that scene will be somewhere on the scale between 0 and 5, and anywhere brighter than where you tapped will be in the scale somewhere from 5 up to number 10. Stick with me, hopefully it's making sense. So the trick with this is you want to use the app, tap around different areas of the screen, figure out what the shutter speeds are for the highlights, the midtones and the shadows, and then you want to try and pick a shutter speed ideally somewhere in the middle, where it means that your highlights don't go too far up on the scale, ideally around 7 or 8, and your shadows or darker areas don't go too low, probably ideally around 2 or 3 on the scale. And if you end up with something like that, then your exposure will be pretty even, and you will have detail in both the shadows and the highlights. So just to show you an example, if I have quite a contrasty scene with quite dark shadows and quite bright highlights, and I decide to expose for the shadows, my shutter speed might be something like 1/15 of a second for the shadows. And if I was to choose to shoot at 1/15 of a second, that means that I am placing 1/15 on number 5 on the scale. Now if the meter reading for the brighter parts of the scene is, let's say, 1/500th, that means it is 5 stops brighter, so it will be at number 10 on the scale. 10 is pure white, so in other words, those brighter areas will be totally overexposed. So to balance things out, I will have to choose a higher shutter speed for my middle grey value. Let's say we went with 1/60th of a second, that would mean that our highlights would now only be 3 stops brighter, which would put them in section 8 on the scale, which would work much better and allow us to keep more detail in the sky. That would also mean that our shadow reading of 1/15th would now be placed in section 3 on the scale, which will also allow us to keep detail in the darker areas. It's all about finding a good balance, like I said, choosing a shutter speed that's ideally nicely in between the shadows and the highlights, so it allows you to keep those highlights below 10, ideally around 8 like I said, and those shadows above 1 or 2, so you don't lose all detail there. I know it's a lot to process, and the first time I heard it, I was like, I think I need to listen to that again because I have no idea how I would use that when I'm out taking photos myself. But after a few times and then after actually going out and trying it, I feel like I know what I'm doing now. So maybe go back and watch the part of the video where I'm explaining it again, or maybe head over to Cody's video and see if you can understand it from him a little bit better. But it's definitely a much more accurate way of metering a scene rather than just picking the shadows and exposing, because a lot of the times you are going to end up blowing out your skies or the brighter areas of your image. But yeah, it just allows you to get a better exposure, and that means that you don't have to worry about trying to bring your highlights way back in post and stuff, unless you're intentionally trying to go for that sort of overexposed portrait look that a lot of people like, then work away. But that's how I've been metering for the last few months with the Yashica, and it's really helped me avoid ending up with shots like this. Instead, it's allowed me to get really spot on exposures with scenes like this that were quite difficult, and I now can kind of understand waiting until the sun maybe goes behind a cloud and I'm prepared to hit the shutter because I know where all my exposure readings and all need to be. Again, that might be kind of hard to understand, but if you go out and try this yourself after maybe a few rolls of using this method, you'll understand what I mean. As quick as the Nikon is, there is something quite enjoyable about using the Yashica fully mechanical, having to meter everything myself. I find it quite fun and kind of relaxing too. But anyway, I'm not going to blabber on anymore. That is how I meter for film photography. Hopefully this has helped you and hasn't just confused you even more. Yeah. Hopefully. I'll just stop blabbering. If you did find this one helpful, maybe give it a thumbs up. Consider hitting the subscribe button if you want to see more. And I think that's pretty much it for this one. If you want to jump into the Discord too, the link is in the description below. And yeah, as we always say, take it easy. Don't be a stranger.